Good evening, my name is Catherine Enberg, and I'm here to talk to you tonight about building an urban-free food forest in Troy, New York for my Capstone 1 presentation. Bringing a food forest to the city would serve the underserved and underprivileged in many ways. Tree Cities is a relatively new initiative that's been implemented and is taking off in other major cities in the United States. Thinking in terms of system resilience, strategies might focus on the potential for green infrastructure to allow for adaptation and even transformation in the face of future challenges such as climate change, food insecurity, and limited resources. Building an urban-free food forest in the local area can address many climate change and equity issues for the local urban community. A city with well-planned and well-managed green infrastructure becomes more resilient, sustainable, and equitable in terms of nutrition and food security, poverty alleviation, livelihood improvement, climate change mitigation and adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and ecosystem conservation. Several specific ecosystem services that could be relevant for evaluating current and future urban green spaces include plant biodiversity, food production, microclimate control, soil infiltration, carbon sequestration, visual quality, recreation, and social capital. The 21st century global population will be increasingly urban, focusing on the sustainability challenge on cities and raising new challenges to address urban resiliency capacity. During the COVID-19 crisis, more than 30 million Americans are currently jobless, and many are struggling to put food on the table. According to Feeding America, nearly 100% of food banks reported an increase in demand for food assistance during the pandemic, with an average increase of 59%. I decided to address the first implementation of this project for the city of Troy, New York. Troy is very progressive when it comes to environmental issues. They have a sustainability committee, a solar farm going up in South Troy, and a water treatment facility. The revitalization this city has undertaken in the last decade has made it a good area to try and implement a sustainable forest. According to residents, this can happen when there's freedom, when things are loose. It doesn't happen when you have an overregulated environment like their sister city across the river, Albany. Troy has tenacity. They're determined, and they're going to make it happen. There are several areas in the city of Troy, New York that could be used to begin such a project. Addressing local government to find an acceptable location that could be managed by the city as part of their urban forest plan is an important step that I am in the process of. Several occupants of the city have suggested open spaces and park areas that could benefit from this idea. This research proposal is important in giving a framework with which to address local government with an idea that could be implemented that would mitigate climate change in a local area, would serve in an educational capacity in an underserved neighborhood, and would improve equity in an impoverished area. It would also add to the overall greening of an inner city environment, thereby affecting human health and mental well-being in a positive way by adding nature back into a concreted landscape. Adding a food forest would also be of benefit to urban wildlife that suffers from habitat loss and would provide a local area for people to be able to become involved with environmental education and protection. Tree Cities is a relatively new initiative that has been popping up all over and taking off in major cities in the United States. It would seem fitting that the capital region of New York State would be on board with such initiatives for their city. Thinking in terms of system resilience, strategies might focus on the potential for green infrastructure to allow for adaptation and even transformation in the face of future challenges such as climate change, food insecurity, and limited resources. The search for alternative methods to access fresh produce in the cities has resulted in the growth of urban agriculture, as has been seen in urban orchards in the streets tended by neighborhood communities, vertical farming on buildings and rooftop gardens, and farmers markets that service the city with locally grown and made items. Cities committing to such an approach by supporting greening projects are likely to benefit in the long run through the value of ecosystem services for urban residents and the broader public. Neighborhoods with resident associations, community groups, business improvement areas, and other social structures that are aware of urban forestry issues are also more likely to engage in the stewardship and lobbying of municipal governments to enhance their urban forest. The concept of a food forest has its roots in permaculture, a philosophy that advocates for managing agricultural landscapes in harmony with nature. The practice emphasizes perennial, low-maintenance crops that leverage natural nutrient inputs, drainage patterns, and climate to achieve a self-sustaining, food-producing ecosystem. A food forest is quite literally a forest that produces food for people, and most certainly for forest critters to eat. Nut and fruit-producing trees and shrubs are planted with herbs, vines, and ground flora that produce fruits, vegetables, and edible greens and roots. Urban communities are increasingly taking up the practice as a way to put underutilized city land to work and combine urban agricultural goals with goals for open space, recreation, and community development. The initial groundwork has been done on acceptance by the public through in-person interviews over the last decade. Private domestic gardens are known to constitute a considerable portion of green space in urban areas and are therefore of potential significance for maintaining biodiversity and ecosystem service provision in such areas. All of my respondents were in favor of this idea. However, a few remain skeptical in the community's ability to maintain a forest system. They are conditionally accepting of the plan as long as they have city and food security and urban gardening collaboration involvement in terms of implementation and maintenance. During this project, I was able to identify the key players in the local area that would be able to address in implementing a test-free food forest. I was able to determine the collaborators and begin to assess the cost and scope of the project and the best way to move forward and address the people I need to in order to implement the project. Collaboration with the City of Troy, Capital Roots Urban Garden Cooperative, with local volunteers that fight hunger in street soldiers will get the forest built and growing. The possibility of continued environmental education with local schools and garden associations in the future can sustain the benefits of implementing this project. Having a timeline mapping out the different steps and a communication tool assessment to develop a project idea to present to possible collaborators in order to address possible local participants was integral to my understanding on how to move forward with implementation of this project. State foresters are available for building purposes for consultation on urban forestry plans in order to get appropriate planting and tree lists. The food forest is built in layers. It will take several years to build each layer before it becomes self-sustaining. Many gardeners are rejecting the usual way of growing food and embracing permaculture. Permaculture is a form of holistic gardening aimed at creating harmony in the environment. One of the techniques of permaculture is to create a food forest. The definition of a food forest is a gardening or land management system that mimics a woodland ecosystem, substituting edible trees, shrubs, perennials, and annuals. It is in part based upon permaculture techniques that require relatively low maintenance and are easily sustainable. The layer concept is widely used as a staged process. The food forest is built in layers and will take several years to build each layer before it becomes self-sustaining. Permaculture is the act of tending to the natural order of the land, becoming integrated with it in the simplest and purest way possible. It is a system, one of which mimics the natural ecosystems we see in nature for the benefit of all. When you create a food forest, you embrace a planting method that's not only holistic, but requires little input once you've planted your garden. You are creating an environment that is more like one that would exist in nature instead of gardening in the modern ways using beds and rows. Forest farming involves growing a variety of crops under a forest canopy, a process that can improve biodiversity and soil quality and support the root systems and carbon sequestration potential of urban forests. The lack of available fresh produce in city neighborhoods, decreased education, and a general occurrence of anxiety and depression, drug use, and some crime could be mitigated by this resource. We are all aware that the link between proper nutrition and normal physical and cognitive growth is a hardwired system. If children are malnourished from conception to 2 years, the impact is lifelong, as their physical growth and intellectual development will be permanently impaired. To ensure the sustainability and security of a viable food, water, and nutrition system for a growing urban population, many key factors influencing the food supply need to be addressed. There is a need to plan for a more resilient urban food supply system. The food forest is built in layers, and it will take several years to build each layer before becoming self-sustaining. At the completion of this project, connections with leaders in local governments, activists, and local urban garden associations to help spread public information about the viability of urban forest gardening, and a timeline with grant options and other educational information deliverables has been completed and made available to use at the local level. In the actual building of the food forest, the location chosen will need to be observed for some time to determine the best layout and plan that works with the specific landscape of the area chosen. Focusing on solutions to environmental issues can give the urban population a sense of hope when faced with seemingly hopeless situations of climate change that are exacerbated by the urban environment. A city well-planned and well-managed green infrastructure becomes more resilient, sustainable, and equitable in terms of nutrition, food security, poverty alleviation, livelihood improvement, climate change mitigation and adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and ecosystem conservation. Research shows that living in proximity of urban green spaces and having access to them can improve physical and mental health, for example, by decreasing high blood pressure and stress. I'd like to answer any questions you may have. Thank you for attending my presentation. My works cited is followed.